Illuminati Unmasked by Giovanni Cerrucci. Audiobook narrated by John Paul Harkins. Chapter 1. America is a captured operation. America is on the verge of collapse. Inexplicably, the United States is under a coordinated assault of unprecedented ferocity from her own institutions. At every level of government, individuals and groups are making decisions and enacting policies that are causing America great harm, and they do so with impunity. Patriotic citizens are seeing organizations who have claimed to be on their side repeatedly betraying them, adding aid and comfort to the very forces destroying the United States from within. Their news media refuses to report these critical issues, and individual journalists who do are dealt with in ways that echo the harsh methodologies of a banana republic. The IRS has targeted political enemies for persecution and prosecution. When queried by Congressional Committee about correspondence between conspirators, IRS Director of Exempt Organizations, Lois Lerner, said they lost the email. And then they said they lost some more. Government agencies use online backup services, such as the one the IRS had via companies like Sonasoft, but the IRS further claimed that their backup service was canceled before they could have helped track down the criminal behavior. When asked about resident files on individual computer hard drives, legislators were told that those hard drives had all crashed.
Ms. Lerner appeared before this committee last May and made an entirely voluntary opening statement in which she professed her innocence. She said she did nothing wrong, broke no laws, and did not violate any IRS rules. After her under oath, wide-ranging claims of innocence, Ms. Lerner answered some additional questions, then Ms. Lerner asserted her Fifth Amendment rights, and then answered some additional questions after asserting the Fifth. We know from her attorney that she sat down for a lengthy, no-strings-attached interview with Eric Holder's Justice Department. She was not granted immunity. Think about that for a second. Ms. Lerner, who once held a position of great power and responsibility at the IRS, is willing to talk to the Justice Department, the executive branch, but she remains unwilling to answer questions from elected representatives of the American people. At one point, Ms. Lerner's attorney told us she would testify, but then rescinded that offer after seeing some of the evidence gathered by the committee. That's not the way these things work. The American taxpayers certainly don't get to plead the Fifth and escape all accountability when the IRS audits them. Yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee voted to release information allowing Chairman Camp to send a letter referring her to the Justice Department for probable criminal acts. I now ask unanimous consent that those documents be placed in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Like Chairman Camp, I am concerned that Ms. Lerner violated the law. If she or her lawyer explained what she wanted to admit and why she needed immunity to tell the full truth, I certainly would consider it. But I'm not going to support immunity so Ms. Lerner can continue to mislead this committee. If she really did nothing wrong and wants to tell the full truth, she doesn't need immunity. Absence a change of position by Ms. Lerner, this committee has already determined that she waived her Fifth Amendment claim. It would be irresponsible for the committee not to vigorously pursue her testimony that includes holding her accountable if she fails to meet her legal obligation.
The most shocking aspect of the entire scandal has been the fact that it was bold, open lawlessness by a Democratic administration, and there have been no substantive consequences levied by the Republican Party, the opposition party. During the 2008 presidential election, Armed black men from the New Black Panthers, a racist organization akin to the KKK, dressed in paramilitary garb, intimidated voters at a polling location. Charges were brought and ignored. As further action was about to be taken, the entire case was dismissed by Justice Department officials. It was an unbelievable act of politically driven lawlessness that went unaddressed by any other government agency. The one good man who was pursuing the case was forced to resign in disgust and despair.
Billy Club right here.
Video recorded here by a poll watcher went viral and has since been associated with voter intimidation. But that's not the full story.
And he was not a police officer. He was not proper security. He was a member of the New Black Panther Party.
That was November 4, 2008, to be exact. Stephen Morse, then a University of Pennsylvania student, was certified as a Republican poll watcher and videotaped his peaceful encounter with the New Black Panthers.
I know they are radicals of a radical party. They are complete and utter outliers, and people like that will certainly exist in the United States and elsewhere around the world. But what were they doing there? I have no idea.
Others thought they knew. At 12:41 p.m. Eastern Time that day, the Drudge Report's top-linked headline was, "Black Panthers block access to voting station." And Drudge kept posting on the story, even adding footage throughout the day. But here's what really happened. The man with the nightstick was asked by police to leave. He did without incident. The other man, well, he was a certified poll watcher. He got to stay.
In 2011, Americans learned that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the Drug Enforcement Agency, and the Justice Department had been caught giving automatic hand grenades and rocket launchers to a bloodthirsty Mexican drug cartel. The rationale they used was that they were conducting a sting to track where the fully functioning weapons ended up, but when queried further, admitted there was no specific tracking method or technology that was used in the assault weapons. 50 caliber sniper rifles and explosives were all lost.
There's a new twist this morning in the government's gunwalking scandal involving an even more dangerous weapon. CBS News investigative correspondent Cheryl Atkinson has been on the story from the very beginning. She joins us now from Washington. Cheryl, good morning.
Good morning, Chris. We're getting new details as the Fast and Furious investigation branches out to a case with a twist, not walking guns, but involving grenades, and a suspect allegedly left to traffic and manufacture them for Mexican drug cartels.
Police say Jean-Baptiste Kingery, a U.S. citizen, was a veritable grenade machine. He's accused of smuggling parts for as many as 2,000 grenades into Mexico for killer drug cartels, sometimes under the direct watch of U.S. law enforcement.
Law enforcement sources say Kingery could have been prosecuted twice in the U.S. for violating export control laws, but that each time prosecutors in Arizona refused to make a case.
Grenades are weapons of choice for the cartels. A recent attack on a casino killed 53 people. Sources tell CBS News that in January 2010, ATF had Kingery under surveillance after he bought about 50 grenade bodies and headed to Mexico. But they say prosecutors wouldn't agree to make a case. So as ATF agents looked on, Kingery and the grenade parts crossed the border and simply disappeared. 6 months later, Kingery allegedly got caught leaving the U.S. from Mexico with 114 disassembled grenades in a tire. One ATF agent told investigators he literally begged prosecutors to keep Kingery in custody this time, fearing he was supplying narco-terrorists, but was again ordered to let Kingery go. The prosecutors, already the target of controversy for overseeing Fast and Furious, wouldn't comment on the grenade case. U.S. Attorney Dennis Burke recently resigned, and his assistant Emery Hurley has been transferred. Sources say Hurley is the one who let Kingery go, saying grenade parts are novelty items, and the case lacked jury appeal.
Now, in August, Mexican authorities raided Kingery's stash house and factory, finding materials for 1,000 grenades there. He's charged with trafficking and allegedly admitted to making grenades, teaching cartels how to make them, and helping them convert semi-automatic rifles to fully automatic. As one source puts it, there's no telling how much damage Kingery did in the year and a half since he was first let go. The Justice Department Inspector General is now investigating this, along with Fast and Furious. Chris?
Those same weapons soon started showing up as the cause of carnage on both sides of the border. A Romanian AK-47, a true assault rifle that was fully automatic after a massive shootout that claimed the life of Mexican beauty queen Maria Susana Flores Gomez in Guamuchil, Mexico. black rifles available to the common American are semi-automatic only. One trigger pull equals one round. How is the United States government able to deal in automatic Romanian assault weapons? Chihuahua City lawyer Mario Gonzalez Rodriguez was found in a shallow grave after being forced to conduct an Al-Qaeda-style confession video. Two more Operation Fast and Furious AK-47s were found after a shootout with cartel members nearby. During another firefight, a federal police helicopter was downed, injuring the two crew members, and a massive cache of weapons was found. Many of them were Fast and Furious weapons. The name of that cartel, the Caballeros Templarios, the Knights Templar, speaks to an eerie higher power behind the drug ring. Why would Mexican drug lords make such an association? More Fast and Furious weapons were found at the scene of an attempted assassination of Tijuana Municipal Secretary of Public Safety, Julian Lezaola. Hostotipaquilo, Mexico Police Chief Luis Lucio Rosales Astorga was murdered with a Fast and Furious sniper rifle. Perhaps worst of all are the American deaths, at least the ones we know of to date. Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry, along with Immigration and Customs Enforcement Special Agent Jamie Zapata, both have fallen to Fast and Furious weapons. When the son of Sinaloa drug cartel leader Ismael El Mayo Zambada Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla was arrested by Drug Enforcement Agency officials in Chicago, it was disclosed that he, his family, and the entire Sinaloa drug cartel were on the U.S. government payroll. As long as they delivered information on rival gangs, they were free to distribute narcotics throughout America and receive deadly weapons in return. Even more incredulous, Department of Justice officials knowingly conducted these operations with the ulterior motive of exploiting the bloodshed with new, stricter gun control legislation in the United States. A single reporter, Cheryl Atkinson, covered the story and was immediately isolated. She was refused admittance to press conferences, and both her work and personal computers were hacked so that important information could be wiped and classified documents planted that could have been used to prosecute her. Atkinson realized both CBS and the Obama administration were behind the tactics, and she resigned as a result.
I've been a reporter for 30 years at CBS News, PBS, CNN, and in local news. My producers and I have probed countless political, corporate, charitable, financial stories ranging from Iraq contract waste and fraud under Bush to green energy waste under Obama to consumer stories relating to the drug industry. Some of these reports have been recognized for excellence in journalism, most recently investigative Emmy nominations and awards for reporting on TARP, Benghazi, green energy spending, Fast and Furious, and a group of stories including an undercover investigation into Republican fundraising. The job of getting at the truth has never been more difficult. Facets of federal government have isolated themselves from the public they serve. They covet and withhold public information that we as citizens own. They bully and threaten access of journalists who do their jobs, news organizations that publish stories they don't like, and whistleblowers who dare to tell the truth. When I reported on factual contradictions in the administration's accounts regarding Fast and Furious, pushback included a frenzied campaign with White House officials trying to chill the reporting by calling and emailing my superiors and colleagues, using surrogate bloggers to advance false claims. One White House official got so mad he angrily cussed me out. The Justice Department used its authority over building security to handpick reporters allowed to attend a Fast and Furious briefing, refusing to clear me into the public Justice Department building. Advocates had to file a lawsuit to obtain public information about Fast and Furious improperly withheld under executive privilege. Documents recently released show emails in which taxpayer-paid White House and Justice Department press officials complained that I was out of control and vowed to call my bosses to try to stop my reporting. Let me emphasize that my reporting was factually indisputable. Government officials weren't angry because I was doing my job poorly. They were panicked because I was doing my job well. Many journalists have provided their own accounts. The White House made good on its threat to punish C-SPAN after C-SPAN dared to defy a White House demand to delay airing a potentially embarrassing interview with the president. 50 news organizations, including CBS and the Washington Post, wrote the White House objecting to unprecedented restrictions on the press that raise constitutional concerns. A New York Times photographer likened the White House practices in some cases to the Soviet news agency TASS. Former Washington Post executive editor Len Downey called the Obama war on leaks by far the most aggressive he's seen since Nixon. David Sanger of the New York Times called this the most closed, control freak administration he's ever covered. New York Times public editor Margaret Sullivan said, "It's the administration of unprecedented secrecy and unprecedented attacks on a free press." Months before we knew that the Justice Department had secretly seized AP phone records and surveilled Fox News' James Rosen, before Director of National Intelligence Director James Clapper incorrectly testified under oath that Americans weren't subject to mass data collection, I was tipped off that the government was likely secretly monitoring me due to my reporting. 3 forensics exams confirmed the intrusive long-term remote surveillance. That included keystroke monitoring, password capture, use of Skype to listen into audio and exfiltrate files, and more. Getting to the bottom of it hasn't been easy. It's unclear what, if anything, the FBI has done to investigate. The Justice Department has refused to answer simple, direct, written congressional questions about its knowledge of the case. It has stonewalled my Freedom of Information requests, first saying that it had no responsive documents, then admitting to 2,500 of them, but never providing any of them. In 2013, Reporters Without Borders downgraded America's standing in the global free press rankings, rating the Obama administration as worse than Bush's. It matters not that when caught, the government promises to dial back or that James Rosen gets an apology. The message has already been received. If you cross this administration with perfectly accurate reporting they don't like, you will be attacked and punished. You and your sources may be subjected to the kind of surveillance devised for enemies of the state. For much of history, the United States has held itself out as a model of freedom, democracy, and open, accountable government. Freedoms of expression and association are, of course, protected by the Constitution. Today, those freedoms are under assault due to government policies of secrecy, leak prevention, and officials' contact with the media, combined with large-scale surveillance programs. The nominee, if confirmed, should chart a new path and reject the damaging policies and practices that have been used by others in the past. If we aren't brave enough to confront these concerns, it could do serious long-term damage to a supposedly free press. Thank you.
The President of Mexico, Felipe Calderón, took to the floor of the United States Congress to implore legislators to reenact the Clinton-Feinstein assault weapons ban. Many saw this as an overtly subversive act, but one that was likely coordinated by American insiders. U.S. citizens got no help from the Republican Party. Representative Darrell Issa, Republican California, chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, told Attorney General Eric Holder that he owned the Fast and Furious scandal, yet he refused to even ask Holder to resign, no less seek his criminal prosecution. 4 years later, instead of prosecutions, firings, and resignations, supervisors with the ATF got promoted. The IRS official who oversaw political-oriented persecution, Stephen Miller, was promoted to oversee Americans' new socialized health care, the Affordable Health Care Act. Barack Obama has been a thorough disappointment to anti-war activists who had heard him rail against the war in Iraq and solemnly vow to close the international detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The war on terror rages on now more than ever, and Gitmo still has a steady stream of prisoners going in and coming out. Many are thoroughly perplexed at how seamless Obama policies have taken over from George W. Bush with so little change. It is almost as if a higher authority guided them both toward the same end, a poisonous one. Libya. In 2003, Libya's ruler Muammar Gaddafi had gone to excessive lengths to show then-President George W. Bush that he wanted to be a respected member of the Fraternity of Nations and turned over all of Libya's weapons of mass destruction. Previous to that, when Pan Am Flight 103 was destroyed over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270 passengers, Gaddafi turned suspects over for prosecution. Such unprecedented cooperation saw then-Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice remove Libya from the list of state sponsors of terrorism in 2007. Libya would receive her citizen suspect back a few years later. After being convicted of murdering 270 people, Abdelbasset Ali Mohamed al-Magrahi was released from prison by United Kingdom authorities in Scotland after being diagnosed with prostate cancer. It was disclosed that al-Magrahi had $4 million in a Swiss bank account, which suspiciously spoke of having very powerful backing. Citizens were assured that Britain's MI6 was investigating, but to date, nothing has been disclosed. Even more suspicious, it was later disclosed that Britain's most notorious Muslim hate preacher, Abu Hamza, was on the MI5 payroll. Were Western nations actively courting radical Islamists to destabilize their own country? Because of, or perhaps in spite of, Muammar Gaddafi's cooperation, Al-Qaeda vowed to overthrow him that very same year, 2007. The man who made that threat, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was accused by Osama bin Laden's personal bodyguard of taking orders directly from Washington, D.C. In an interview via Lebanon's Asian news agency, Nabil Naim Abul Fattah claimed that both al-Qaeda and Islamic rebels in Syria were controlled by the CIA. Foreign policy experts surmised that Gaddafi knew this and began acting accordingly. First, he pulled out of Western oil contracts. Then Gaddafi began to divest the U.S.-Saudi petrodollar and cut off the investments of the International Monetary Fund, replacing the indebted fiat currency with a gold Libyan dinar. What is fiat currency? Fiat currency is a note of financial transaction that is not backed by any specie. A commonly recognized form of value, e.g. precious metals, such as gold or silver. American currency continues to have worth only as long as those who use it believe America will not go bankrupt. After generations of debt spending by both parties, this is now guaranteed, and international entities are rushing to use or create alternative forms of currency. Fiat currency is what you have in your pocket right now. You cannot exchange your Federal Reserve note, $1 bill, for a dollar's worth of gold or silver. Richard Milhous Nixon is credited with taking the dollar off the gold standard by issuing Executive Order 11615. The executive order in and of itself has become a tool of tyranny, far removed from George Washington using it to procure China for the capital. Is this a planned agenda? Inflation will continue to devalue middle-class buying power until it equals the Weimar Republic chaos of 1924 Germany. In reality, it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt who took the power of privately owned gold from the American people with his Executive Order 6102, confiscating personal gold from citizens in supposed reaction to the Great Depression. Americans willingly accepted it, as did poor American citizens of Japanese descent. It is a little-known fact that the cause of so much defamation of America via her institutionalized racism was done with the stroke of Roosevelt's pen via Executive Order 9066. Roosevelt imprisoned an entire race of people based solely upon their ethnicity. Since then, an unaccountable central bank, our Federal Reserve, has been recklessly printing money completely disconnected to any worth. Is this agenda being pushed by a higher power that desperately seeks the destruction of the American middle class? Gaddafi then utilized his nation's wealth to create irrigation that had been termed the eighth wonder of the world. This was the beginning of his end. In February of 2011, Barack Obama initiated military action in Libya without a formal declaration. The conflict endured for 8 months and culminated in a vicious public torture and execution of Muammar Gaddafi. An immediate and key target of NATO bombing runs was Libya's man-made river. A handful of representatives gave easily defeated resistance. A lawsuit led by Dennis Kucinich, Democrat, Ohio, and Walter Jones, Republican, North Carolina, tried to stop Obama on a clear violation of the War Powers Act. Unbelievably, Judge Reggie Walton ruled they had no standing and threw it out. Later, Congressman Ron Paul, Republican, Texas, would join Kucinich in calling for Obama's impeachment, but the effort immediately stalled. All key leaders inside the Republican Party fully support both Barack Obama and his policies. Not only did the upstarts have no allies in Congress, the Republicans sent out a coalition of familiar names to celebrate what the Obama administration had done. United States Senators Mark Kirk, Republican, Illinois, Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, Mark Rubio, Republican, Florida, and John McCain, Republican, Arizona, ran to get a quick photo op with Islamicists who were pulling Christians from their homes and committing atrocities on them and their families. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was asked about her reaction to the destabilizing of Libya and the execution of that nation's sovereign. Her response was completely disconnected from reality and compassion. We came, we saw, he died.
We came, we saw, he died. We came, we saw, he died.
Clinton herself had an inexplicable and meteoric rise to power with no political experience. She became a United States Senator representing a state she never lived in, New York. Clinton's past is a sordid one. She personally ruined the lives of women who accused Bill Clinton of sexual harassment and rape. She would be given access to FBI dossiers on key Republican political enemies to be used for blackmail. Today, she is shadowed by an assistant who is almost certainly an agent for the Muslim Brotherhood, Huma Abedin. Is there something to be learned from Clinton's sociopath response to Muammar Gaddafi's death? It was Roman conqueror Julius Caesar who wrote to the Senate after defeating Pharnaces II, Veni, vidi, vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. Was she acting on behalf of today's Roman authority? All roads lead to Rome. How is it possible that America could so repeatedly be ruled and governed by one party that openly hates her and another party that subversively enables them behind closed doors? Not a judge, not a general, not even conservative pundits speak of this conspiracy. Conspiracy, a secret plan made by two or more people to do something that is harmful or illegal. Merriam-Webster. Many nations hate America. Many more individuals do. But who has the power and reach to do so much harm with so little resistance? To explain their behavior, Senators Kirk, Graham, Rubio, and McCain were given an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which they used to proclaim a promise of pro-American Libya. Less than a year later, we would see the fruit of what they had all sown in pro-American Libya. On September 11, 2012, radical jihadists who had been running Libya since the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, raping, murdering, and enslaving innocents there, stormed what mainstream media called an embassy in Benghazi and killed the United States ambassador. Immediately, the Obama administration stated that this was a spontaneous conflagration as a result of outrage over a YouTube video that no one had ever heard of called The Innocence of Muslims. But just as quickly the story began to fall apart. The apparent producer of the film disappeared and was later arrested. Nakula Baseli Nakula was labeled as the Christian behind the film, yet one of the actresses in it claimed the redundantly named director professed to be a Muslim.
And now the film that's been blamed for the violence. The angry protests against the U.S. in Libya and Egypt are blamed in part on an amateur film called Innocence of Muslims, which ridicules the Prophet Muhammad. Now, I've watched the video. It's about 14 minutes long. It's supposedly a trailer for a longer film, and we have decided not to show it. But we can tell you that it's bizarre, and it portrays the Prophet Muhammad as gay, a child molester, and a, quote, murderous thug. It depicts Islam as a fraudulent religion. Out front tonight, Miguel Marquez. And Miguel, I know you spoke to an actress who worked on the film, had some of the hard and painful lines I just said there were among hers. What did she tell you?
Yeah. Well, she is horrified at what's happened, and the only reason she went on camera is because she is horrified by what's happened. She doesn't want her name used. She's afraid for her life, but she's more angry at what the filmmaker has done. She said she took a small role in this film, that she thought it was called Desert Warriors. That's how it was represented to her, that it was an adventure film set 2,000 years ago. There was no discussion of Muhammad in the film. She says the character that Muhammad was in the film is actually named George in the film and was referred to either as Master George or Father Master during the film. She says that she was paid $500 for about 3 or 4 days of work on this film. She made a small, low-budget film, and she finds herself now in an international nightmare.
I would never be involved in a film to ever hurt or bring harm to anybody. And this makes me sick to my stomach to think that I was involved in that movie that brought death to somebody else. And I think it's unfair. I think it's very unfair. And I'm very sorry for that man, his family, and everybody else that was hurt. I really don't know what to say.
She is absolutely shocked by how this thing has taken off. This was a little tiny film. She also, during that interview, apologized to Muslims everywhere. She wants them to know that she and no other actors had anything to do with this being a propaganda film or anti-Islam or political. None of that, she says, was what she got into this for. It was a simple film that she was making, and it has completely was misrepresented to her and changed after they had filmed their parts. Aaron?
Miguel, I'm curious because, watching it, there were a lot of people involved. Apparently, according to a statement CNN obtained on behalf of the 80 cast and crew members, the statement that they released to CNN said, quote, the entire cast and crew are extremely upset and feel taken advantage of by the producer. We are 100% not behind this film, and we're grossly misled about its intent and purpose. However, when I watch it, they're talking about Muhammad, and not the Prophet Muhammad, but Muhammad, and they're talking about him being a child molester or being being gay. And I'm wondering, do you believe this statement? Do you think that they possibly may not have known and really are upset? I mean, what's your take?
She says they did something called looping. They made the film, she came back later, and she did other lines. It is possible that some of those lines were also read by other people. If you watch that film, which just looks like a cheap, low-budget,
Yes.
It looks like a comedy more than anything.
Yeah.
It appears that some of the lines have been completely dubbed over. She did say that she talked to Sam Basile, the film's producer today, who is defiant. He's been described as somebody who's in hiding and fearful for his life. But she says that this guy is defiant, that he says he's done this because he's tired of radical Islamists killing Americans, and that he is at fault for the movie. He is the writer. He said, "Don't let anyone blame you. It's me, the writer, Sam Basile, who is at fault here."
An anti-Islamic film produced in the United States triggered a new wave of anti-American protests in Pakistan today. Police fired tear gas at students to keep them away from the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. Protesters burned an effigy of President Obama in the streets of another city. Muslims call the film blasphemous, saying it mocks the Prophet Muhammad. One of the actresses in that film, called Innocence of Muslims, appeared in a Los Angeles courtroom. Cindy Lee Garcia is suing the filmmaker for fraud and slander, saying she was tricked into appearing in the trailer.
Cindy, what was your understanding about what the film was about?
When I originally was casted for the film, the name of the film was Desert Warriors, and it was supposed to be based on how things were 2,000 years ago. On set, Muhammad or Muslims were never mentioned.
Garcia says she's getting death threats.
My whole life has been turned upside down in every aspect.
The actress says Nakula Baselli Nakula, who used the alias Sam Baselli, never completed the film she was working on, and that he dubbed anti-Islamic dialogue into the clips without the actor's knowledge. Nakula went into hiding after authorities questioned him last weekend.
A judge rejected Garcia's request to order YouTube and Google to remove the trailer. Garcia says it invades her privacy. The internet companies argued removing the clips would be a violation of free speech.
She did not consent to being used as a puppet for someone else's hateful message.
YouTube has blocked the trailer in Saudi Arabia, Libya, Egypt, Indonesia, and India because it violates laws in those countries. Bigat Shaban, CBS News, Los Angeles.
The quality of the film was less than amateur. Mainstream media unquestioningly accepted the Obama administration's story, but independent journalists found that the Canadian company that built the Obamacare website was the parent corporation for one of the outlets that helped promote the innocence of Muslims. The mistress of former CIA Director David Petraeus, Paula Broadwell, leaked during a speech at her alma mater, the University of Denver, that Benghazi was actually a CIA way station used for interrogating prisoners. More than that, Benghazi had become a funnel for weapons being taken from chaos-filled Libyan armories and secreted out to jihadists in Syria to help destabilize that nation as well. Saudi Arabia and Turkey were disclosed as helping British and American intelligence, MI6 and the CIA, accomplish this agenda. The transfer of small arms to radical Muslims from the CIA is a generational operation, but when this transfer included the man-portable SA-7 surface-to-air missiles stolen from Libyan armories, personnel at the State Department decided to intervene. Ambassador Christopher Stevens was dispatched to work with the jihadists, the Turks, and the CIA. It later raised eyebrows to learn that the ambassador was reputed to have lived a homosexual lifestyle when he was in Chicago. The Chicago homosexual connection would later be levied at Barack Obama, his former chief of staff Rahm Emanuel, and other key figures. According to CIA insider Claire Lopez, the Turkish Consul General Ali Sait Aiken conveniently slipped out of his meeting with Ambassador Chris Stevens just before the ambush started, leading some to believe the adage, once in the firm, always in the firm. Lopez would later vehemently deny that the CIA was helping Libyan Islamists when interviewed by Christian news broadcaster Rick Weil. With these facts in place, it becomes clear that powerful people in the CIA decided to counter Christopher Stevens' mission by selling him out, and they used the authority of Barack Obama to accomplish treason. Getting man-pads, man-portable air defense systems in the hands of reckless Islamists was so important to them, it was worth being exposed as subversives in the highest offices of American government. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton implicated her involvement by slashing the security at Benghazi before the September 11th attack.
I don't want anything that is said to me or about me to take away from the heroic efforts that the diplomatic security officers exhibited. The 5 men who were with Chris and Sean Smith risked their lives repeatedly and were themselves under grave threat. I wanted to point out that even when we try to get it right, which we do try, sometimes there are unintended consequences, and there is an example out of this tragedy. Coming out of previous assessments of attacks on facilities, we now have safe havens, safe rooms in facilities, particularly residences. The diplomatic security officers were able to get both Chris and Sean into that safe room. Of course, the idea behind the safe room, why security experts advocated for them, was to protect our civilians, our diplomats, from attacks like the one that was occurring. The attackers used diesel fuel to set the compound on fire. And the safe room was anything but safe. I'm sure the committee members know that neither Chris Stevens nor Sean Smith died from injuries directly inflicted by the attackers. They both died of smoke inhalation. And one of the recommendations in this ARB report is that when we have safe havens, we need to have equipment that will enable people that are safe within them to withstand what happened in Benghazi. The lead diplomatic security officer who was with both the ambassador and Sean Smith endeavored to lead them to safety through a wall of black smoke. He wanted to get them out of the compound interior up to the roof where they could be out of the fire and also out of the attackers' assault. He himself nearly died of smoke inhalation. When he looked around to make sure that both Sean and Chris were with him, he couldn't find them. Rather than proceeding and saving himself, which would be a natural human instinct, he turned back into that black diesel smoke, desperately trying to find Chris and Sean. He did find Sean, and Sean had succumbed to smoke inhalation.
American personnel in Libya were distressed by her actions and asked that they be rescinded, but they were repeatedly denied. Not only was the consulate underprotected, the attackers had inside information including where to find Chris Stevens in order to torture and execute him, even though he had what he thought was a secure location to retreat. Guantanamo Bay detainee Sufyan Ben Kumu was released in order to plan this event, along with U.S.-trained Muslim Brotherhood agent Mohsen al-Azazi. They joined a coalition of international Islamists in Libya. But the betrayal goes even further. The tiny security detail at Benghazi held off the attackers for 13 grueling hours.
You know, you hear over the radio, we're taking fire, we're under fire.
We're under fire.
And you hear the pleading in their voices.
You can hear it.
That they need help bad.
I actually dropped to a knee, and then I'm like, why the hell did I do that? And that's when the rocket hit.
Roan had a machine gun, and he started laying down hate.
I rolled him over. There's no response. I ripped off his body armor, took a pulse, couldn't feel nothing.
When you realize they're dead, what do you do?
I just kind of said a prayer over both of them.
Libyan visa. Official.
Pull over for inspection.
Sorry, sir, I can't do that.
Pull over for inspection!
How willing are you to die for your country? I'm ready to go right here, right now.
Everybody, this is Jack Silva.
Jack.
We train SEALs at Coronado, so he knows the drill.
Welcome to Club Med.
We need immediate assistance. We are overrun.
State's under attack. Let's go, man. State's under attack.
Let's go! We gotta move! If you do not get here soon, we are all gonna die.
You have a U.S. ambassador at risk.
The ambassador is in his safe haven. You're not the first responders. You're the last resort. You will wait.
None of you have to go. But we are the only help they have.
Called fire support. Never came.
You're not giving orders anymore. You're in my world now.
We have 36 American lives to save.
Everyone in Washington, D.C. who needed to know knew what was going on almost instantaneously.
Now to the phones, since it's Open Line Friday, it's Doug in San Antonio. Great to have you on the program, sir. Hello.
Hi, Rush. Thanks. I wanted to speak to the question of when the president knew and why Secretary Panetta refused to support the CIA annex request for either to move to the consulate or to be reinforced. Within a few minutes of the consulate being under attack, I'm a retired lieutenant colonel, special operations planner for 15 years. The personal security detail for the ambassador notified the communications room in Tripoli, who then, on the top secret side, sent a message to the White House Situation Room that the ambassador was in peril. Okay? And they did that by code word, and it would have been within minutes of the attack commencing. The White House Situation Room has a list of what's called essential elements of friendly information. That's the military's acronym for it, but they would have a similar thing, critical information list. Certain things go right to the person that's standing next to the president, both military and civilian leadership. So he would have known within minutes, or is supposed to be informed within minutes, because an ambassador is a 4-star equivalent, very high, very important person, represents the president and essentially is the president's, is the surrogate of the president in that country. So the White House cannot deny that the president knew immediately.
They are. They are.
Well, it's a bald-faced lie. I'm giving you some inside baseball information.
I believe you. You're talking about watch desks. That tells me you know what you're talking about.
Well, it's even a little more frustrating than that. So when that message, that code word goes out, flash traffic, that an ambassador is in peril, okay?
We have heard this. This is in our parlance. The way we heard this, Doug, was essentially the panic button was hit. That's how we civilians. This was explained to me the first time somebody who knew what they were talking about referenced this as a panic button. Essentially, was hit, and that once that happens, everybody that receives it knows what's going on. There's no doubt about it. So that's pretty much true, right?
Right, but it's even more detailed than that, Rush. What it means is when the code word goes out, there's standard operating procedures. The geographic combatant commander that's responsible for Libya would have been part of that message traffic. And his Think in Extremis force, which is a special forces unit.
Okay, let me stop you there for another question. So, because what a lot of people have been told, The excuse that has been offered, in fact, from Condoleezza Rice on Greta Van Susteren a couple nights ago, the impression is, well, there's so much traffic coming in. There's so many emails, so many cables, so many memos. It's it would take somebody hours to sift through it. What you're telling me is that there are systems designed to penetrate all that in a real emergency?
Well, there's three networks, Rush. The emails that have been released are unclassified emails. On the top secret side, a flash traffic message from the embassy Tripoli to the White House Situation Room, it's like an IM. I mean, it's immediately responded to. You have to acknowledge receipt of it, okay? So it's immediate. It gets to the person, the watch officer sitting there, boom, flashes on his screen. He has to acknowledge receipt. And then there's a protocol for who he then sends it to. And he physically turns to someone, the senior guy on watch, says, this is a critical element of information. POTUS needs to hear this. And that's what would have happened. So no one in the White House can deny that. Well, they can deny it, but the fact is the protocol says someone marched their happy little ass up to the senior guy standing next to POTUS and said, sir, Ambassador Libya is in peril. And if he was missing, that is even a higher precedence. And then the chain would have also gone out automatically to the Geographic Combatant Commander, AFRICOM, and he would have then turned to his Special Operations Commander and said, I want the in extremis force, strip ready in 5 minutes. And evidently they were strip ready in Sigonella. And they would have had the assets to penetrate the airspace. An MC-130 Papa, which is a C-130 specially equipped with the electronic countermeasures, they didn't need permission to enter Libyan airspace. Okay? I'm giving you a lot of inside baseball stuff and maybe putting myself in a little peril by doing it. But the in extremis force, they would have been chomping at the bit to do this. It was turned down by POTUS at his 5 p.m. Eastern Time meeting with the principals. That's when he put the kibosh on everything. It was a conscious act. It essentially has to be because, the in extremis force is required to be prepared to do in extremis non-combatant evacuation operations for its geographic responsibility. The entire continent of Africa. So there's always somebody ready to go. And the aircraft are always prepared to go. It's maddening to say that it was not intelligent. An intelligence guy is not a decision maker. He's just some skinny analyst dude that tells the decision makers, this is what we know. Well, the decision makers who are so risk averse now need perfect intelligence. They would have had to have, in the calculus of this, to know that, whatever the attacking force was, if I put 15 or 50 or 100 operators on the ground, they'll have success. Well, no one knows that. In soft planning, you plan to fail half the time.
What about the story we've been told that not only was there so much traffic coming in that it was impossible to find the right stuff, which you've now explained, but they're also telling us that the president wasn't told for a while, and even now, I mean, as late as today, recently as today, they're saying that the 3 most recent emails. It sounds like we're talking about flash traffic's not emails, right?
Flash traffic is digital from station to station.
Right, so they're misleading us left and right. They're trying to say, well, the president, they will not explain. They will not tell us what happened to the 3 emails and why he didn't get them or why he wasn't told or when he knew or what. They're basically portraying the president as removed from all this.
Well, bottom line is a flash traffic saying that the ambassador's in peril, or worse, missing. The protocol is for someone to physically make contact with the person in the chain that's supposed to determine what happens next. Now, I can't, I wasn't in the...
Okay, let me ask. A question came up yesterday that I couldn't answer, and I need to ask you. Just from what you're saying, but let's assume for a second, this is unreal, but let's assume they can't find POTUS. I mean, let's assume he's just not engaged. Who has trigger authority on a response to something like this?
Well, in extremis,
I mean, you say we don't need permission to send a C-130 in there to disrupt. Who orders it in there in a situation like this? Who has the authority to order the C-130s, wherever they are, Italy, wherever they are, to take action? If you can't find the president, is the president the only guy that can give that order?
No, sir. Okay? Basically, in the absence of permissions, okay, you have standing orders. And one of the standing orders to the geographic combatant commander is to preserve life of American citizens.
Exactly. Precisely.
So, and he's a 4-star. You know, he's in Germany. AFRICOM, headquarters is in Germany. You know, and their ops center would have been monitoring this in real time because it's part of their geographic responsibility. And they would have been going through the different, permutations of courses of action of who can get there the quickest. Now, in their geographic area, they have Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa, which is in Djibouti, and I served there when it was the Joint Special Operations Task Force Crisis Response Element. And we had responsibility for all of CENTCOM and AFRICOM and Africa, because at the time there was no AFRICOM. And we had the capacity to get from where we were in Djibouti to Benghazi in about 3 hours, 4 hours, depending on what we wanted to take. Now, if we wanted to go in there with a lot of operators, and at the time we had about 100 operators, it would have taken us probably 5 hours.
Okay, Doug, you're sitting out here. You obviously are intimately familiar with all this. So what's going through your mind, A, in real time when you hear about this, and then in subsequent days when you hear the excuses or explanations that have been offered for why no action was taken? I mean, I'm maybe putting you on the spot and you can't share that with us, but I got to ask you.
It stems from Desert One, Rush. It stems from the failure of Desert One during the Iranian hostage rescue. And that has become, what commander wants to repeat that? Now, at the lieutenant colonel level, at the colonel level of the in extremis force, of all these different headquarters at the State Department, everybody was saying, let's go. Let's get boots on the ground and kick these people's asses and get our people. But who makes those decisions is POTUS, the POTUS state SecDef. And they had a 5 o'clock Eastern time meeting, and they said no. We're willing to have the consulate overrun and the ANT overrun and all those people, which is before would have been killed, dozens. We're willing to stop that.
People are going to want the fact that they're afraid of replicating Carter's boondoggle. That's not going to fly with a lot of people.
With Predator drones overhead and security teams within a very short distance all ready to go, the message from Washington was, stand down.
A Fox News alert. Breaking news now on the deadly terror attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya. Fox News sources telling us CIA officers on the ground in Benghazi during the attack sent requests for help but were denied. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with more on this. Jennifer.
Hi, John. Well, sources who were on the ground in Benghazi during the attack tell Fox News that, in fact, there were 3 separate requests to aid not only the attack that was occurring at the consulate and to try and help with that attack, but also requests for outside help, outside military to help once there were gunfires and firefights at the CIA annex. Those requests, we're told, came from higher headquarters. They were told to stand down. There were, as you know, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods, the former Navy SEALs, were over at the CIA annex at about 9:40 p.m. when the first shots were heard at the consulate where the ambassador and his team were taking fire. I'm told that they radioed to their higher headquarters that they wanted permission to go and help the ambassador, to help the ambassador's teams. At that time, they were told by their higher-ups to, quote, stand down. They waited approximately an hour They requested again to send Glenn Doherty, Tyrone Woods, and other members of that team to help out at the consulate. They were again, for a second time, told to stand down. They ignored those orders. They made their way over to the consulate against orders. They helped rescue those who had survived at the consulate. They could not find the ambassador. They made their way back to the CIA annex about 1 mile away at midnight. That is approximately, the firing had started at 9:40 p.m., so that is approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes later. They get back to the CIA annex. They begin taking fire almost immediately. 4 mortars are fired at the compound. During that time, there was no problem with communications, I'm told from sources on the ground. They were in constant radio contact with higher headquarters. They were calling for military support, air support. I've also learned from separate sources that there was at least one special operations unit, most likely Delta Force, that was waiting on standby at Sigonella Air Base, about 480 miles from Benghazi. They could have been at Benghazi in approximately 2 hours. They were part of the Commanders in Extremis Force, a SIF, they're called in the special operations community. They did not take off from Sigonella. Typically, on the ground, when special operations forces are involved in a firefight like this, they can call in air support from what are known as Spectre gunships. These are commonly used by the special operations communities, and sources in Benghazi who were involved in the attack say that no gunships were sent, no help was sent, even though the fighting at the CIA annex went on for more than 4 hours. We're also told that those at the CIA annex took into custody 3 Libyan attackers and were forced to hand them over to the Libyan February 17th forces that came to help at the annex at approximately 4 in the morning. They handed those 3 Libyans over. It's not clear from U.S. officials what happened to those Libyans and whether those Libyan attackers were in fact released in the end by the Libyans. But this is somewhat explosive information that 3 requests were denied from higher headquarters to not only help the ambassador and his team at the consulate, but also to send in outside military help that could have helped in this ongoing firefight that went on for 6 hours and 20 minutes. We have confirmed that there were 2 surveillance drones sent over Benghazi. One of them was sent into position. It was already in position over Libya at the time, over eastern Libya. It was positioned shortly after the firing began. It had to be replaced by a second drone later in the evening. So there was always one drone up above sending real-time video back to computers that could be accessed at any of the agencies here in Washington. Anyone with a clearance at CIA, Pentagon, the White House Situation Room, or at the State Department could be tapping into that real-time video from the drones up above Benghazi on that night of September 11th and 12th. John?
Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon with some explosive information there. And so Doherty and Woods, who gave their lives in this attack, tried to rescue the others. In fact, did rescue the others against orders, you're saying. And this thing could have been a lot worse had they not done so. It's just incredible, and so many questions left to answer. Thank you, Jennifer.
And John, one final point. Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods were killed at 4 a.m. by a mortar shell. That is 6 hours and 20 minutes after the fighting at the consulate began. My source also tells me that one of the team was on the roof with a laser pointer with eyes on the mortar attack team, the Libyan mortar, the people who were shelling. That laser could have helped guide in any Spectre gunship or any other form of military help if it had been sent from Sigonella.
Or an armed drone even. Jennifer Griffin, again, we'll get back to you later. Thank you so much.
As the besieged Americans cried out for help, hour after hour, military commanders in theater broke ranks and readied to send help. They were relieved of duty. AFRICOM Commanding Officer General Carter Ham and the Theater Carrier Task Force Commander Admiral Charles M. Gayouette were both fired from their commands, and investigative journalist Dave Hodges says at least Ham for sure was arrested by a CIA mole, his executive officer. Such a CIA-planted executive officer would have had some difficulty trying to arrest George Patton, who kept a Model 51 Remington 380 tucked in his belt at all times, or to stop him from rescuing Americans besieged at Bastogne. Patton would later be assassinated by the OSS because of his patriotism and indomitable leadership. How can American intelligence be run by such poisonous power and remain unopposed? How can Barack Obama's aberrant lifestyle be completely covered up? As weak as the resistance was from those two flag officers, it was enough to cause fear in the Obama administration, and a massive purge has been initiated by Obama's Iranian-born senior advisor, Valerie Jarrett. As a result of the role she plays, Jarrett receives full protection from the Secret Service. Two former Navy SEALs, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods, disobeyed orders to do what no other military commanders had the integrity to do and brought help to the besieged Americans. They paid for their patriotism with their lives.
When we have breaking news tonight, exclusive new details that you'll only see on this program about the attack in Libya that killed 4 Americans, including Ambassador Christopher Stevens and 2 former Navy SEALs, Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods. They died heroes, we've known that, but until tonight we had no idea of just how far beyond the call of duty these 2 men went.
Although hard-left pundits like Eleanor Clift put out stories that Ambassador Christopher Stevens died of smoke inhalation from a fire, it was clear that he was alive when the CIA-enabled Islamicists tortured and murdered him. That was September 11, 2012. 2 years later, Speaker John Boehner, in charge of the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, would pick South Carolina firebrand Trey Gowdy to lead the Benghazi investigation. But while meaningless memes permeate social networking regarding the toughness of Gowdy and his qualifications to take over the House, there hasn't been a single subpoena. As Gowdy remained quiet, the Republican chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Rogers, issued a statement that there was no stand down and no wrongdoing by the Obama administration on September 11, 2012. As America slowly devolves into a complete Orwellian police state where innocent citizens are watched and recorded without warrants or proof of wrongdoing, it is the Republican Party that leads the way. In 2013, Republican Mike Rogers was lobbying hard for massive internet control and shutdown via CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. It was later disclosed that Rogers' wife, Christy Clemens Rogers, former president and CEO of the military contracting firm Aegis LLC, was helping funnel billions in taxpayer dollars toward her former company. Free traders. One of the most powerful weapons employed against the American middle class is free trade. America has been bereft of her best manufacturing jobs as both Democrats and Republicans, with conservatives like Rush Limbaugh trumpeting the way, walk in lockstep to this agenda. Sick with battered wives syndrome, organized unions consistently get out the vote each year for Democrat candidates who consistently support free trade agreements that obliterate tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs. Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama. How can their trade policy be perfectly aligned if not because it's being managed by a higher power bent on breaking the American middle class? In Oregon, a woman opened up a Halloween costume for her child that she bought from Kmart and found a heartbreaking note in English begging for help from a slave laborer making $1.61 a month. As free traders like Rush Limbaugh light another cigar on the golf course, Chinese peasants are chaining their toddlers outside their sweatshops because both parents are forced to work 12-hour days for pittance. Limbaugh's dutiful acceptance of both Barack Obama's constitutional eligibility and the government narrative of the bin Laden execution have perplexed fans. The Apple factory in China forces their communist peasants to work 24-hour shifts while being exposed to a toxic environment. Conditions are so bad, workers were jumping off roofs to commit suicide. Nets were installed to save them and send them back to their workstations. The founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, was an excellent example of the modern taskmaster. Jobs drove his $250,000 Mercedes without license plates and parked it in handicapped spot. Steve Jobs, dead at 56 of pancreatic cancer. Free borders. But there's another agenda of self-destruction, even more obvious than free trade, and that's America's open borders. The purposeful mismatching of disparate peoples has been a method of control by the elite over the masses for thousands of years. Samaritans were maligned by ancient Hebrews because after an Israeli civil war, the nation of Assyria later conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom was known as Judah. Those conquered Jews were forcibly mixed with pagans that were brought in from as far as Babylon. 2 Kings 17:24. Their capital, Samaria, became synonymous with their new religion, a syncretistic mix of Judaism and paganism, much as Rome mixes Christianity and paganism. This forced intermingling, however, has met some resistance.
over the level of illegal immigration into Italy. They wanted to show their opposition to a special search and rescue operation programme launched last year to save migrants lost at sea. The rally was organised by the Lega Nord party, which is known for its regionalist and anti-migration stance. RT's Irina Galushka has more.
Truly a massive rally here in Milan. Well, you can probably see from the pictures here, tens of thousands of people have come out on the street to protest what they call essentially an invasion. Now, they are talking about migration. Migrants, most of them illegal migrants, who are coming to Italy every year. And every year that number grows. A lot of people are saying that migrants are actually being treated better than Italians themselves.
It's an invasion by illegal immigrants. It's a crime. We ourselves have many problems with the economic crisis.
The government should protect the boundaries and identity of a country from such an invasion, but European policies make us lose our identity.
On top of that, there's of course the problem with the fact that for a lot of the people who are coming to Italy is that this trip is actually turning deadly. We're talking about thousands of migrants who have died at sea while trying to reach the coast of Italy or the coast of the island of Lampedusa. 3,000 people just this year alone. So Italy has organized a service called Mare Nostrum, which is designed to keep track of the possible legal migrants who are trying to cross sea from the coast of Northern Africa into Italy.
The Italian government sends ships to pick up citizens of other countries, brings them here, puts them in hotels, gives them internet, cigarettes and food, and the government gives nothing to my grandfather. The EU is leaving this problem to Italy, but Italy can't afford this anymore.
Our service, Mare Nostrum, is actually going to cease its existence in November. Italy, for a very long time, has been asking the European Union, Brussels, for help. But just in July, we have heard from Minister of the Interior of Germany, who said that at this point, the Union simply cannot afford to help Italy. We have thousands of people who are living in countries which have been more or less destroyed by the policies of Brussels. They're forced to move elsewhere to countries like Italy in order to look for a better life, and yet nobody is happy to see them, even though they are risking their lives in order to try and get anywhere where they may have an opportunity for a good life.
Well, the Lega Nord demonstration was met by a countermarch of hundreds of anti-fascist activists. They were joined by various social and community groups. Activists chanted anti-fascist slogans and carried caricatures of the Lega Nord party's leaders. Some immigrants also took to the streets to assert their right to stay in the country.
In Britain, roving gangs of Muslim men are raping and enslaving white teenagers at will with no response from law enforcement. Inexplicably, the reason some agencies have given for their refusal to rein in the chaos and outrage is that they didn't want to be accused of racism. America is one of the only nations in the world who has left her borders wide open to pandemic disease, Islamic jihad, and weapons of mass destruction. Megacorporations and governments at all levels kowtow to Spanish-speaking aliens to ensure they have no need to assimilate. While illegal drunk drivers are slaughtering Americans by the bushel, when they are exposed to the government, they receive perks to go out and kill again. The reason for this agenda is to destabilize America and destroy her national identity, and it's working. In Sacramento, a tattoo-ridden alien and his wife killed 2 sheriff's deputies. Luis Enrique Monroy Bracamonte had already been deported for possession and distribution of narcotics once before. He had returned and was using a different name. The state of California has seen the most concentrated influx of Hispanic illegal immigrants, and they have empowered leftist politicians at every level. Gun rights have been particularly targeted. If a retired soldier expresses emotional distress for any reason, they can easily be adjudicated at risk, and law enforcement quickly shows up at the soldier's door to confiscate his firearm. Bureaucrats in California are exploiting every possible law and regulation to send SWAT teams to take thousands of privately owned California weapons. No due process is required for gun confiscation in California. Provisions in the Affordable Health Care Act, also known as Obamacare, open all Americans to an unannounced visit from a healthcare agent if your family uses tobacco, your kids don't make straight A's, or there's a veteran in the home. Criminal mayors use sanctuary city policies to deposit illegals on neighboring towns. California's political landscape has been carefully manipulated by an unseen hand via this illegal invasion. California gave America 2 of its 5 most recent Republican presidents, but the state party has fallen on hard times since the days of Nixon and Reagan. After having fallen for decades, the number of registered Republican voters in California now stands at just 30%. See chart. With the number of voters expressing no party preference rising fast, the party is in danger of slipping into third place in the state. No Republican holds statewide office in California, and the Democrats enjoy wide majorities in both chambers, fading into irrelevance. They are being openly enabled by Democrat politicians who vehemently push to grant illegals citizen status. Barack Obama has acted unilaterally via executive order to provide 5 million illegal immigrants with work permits and amnesty. Former Republican governor and presidential contender Jeb Bush is in full support. Inexplicably, this suicide policy is being followed by both of America's politicals. They have a surprising ally behind them, a coalition of religious leaders, including San Francisco Archbishop George Niederauer, led some 10,000 protesters Sunday in demanding Congress enact more immigrant-friendly policies. Archbishop joins immigrant rights rally, Associated Press. Quite a slanted headline. Many Americans are ignorant of the Vatican's promotion of this agenda, but there has been perfect continuity regardless of who is the Holy See. With such strong synergy between Washington and Rome, does this cooperative effort to harm America prove the existence of an unseen hand? Illegal aliens are being allowed to fly on commercial airliners without valid identification. According to the National Border Patrol Council, NBPC, the aliens who are getting released on their own recognizance are being allowed to board and travel commercial airliners by simply showing their notice to appear forms. NBPC's local 2455 spokesman Hector Garza told Breitbart, Texas. Brandon Darby, Breitbart.com. As these efforts become more powerful, the legitimization for them becomes more questionable. Currently, Americans have been told that Mexican families are recklessly throwing their children aboard planes, trains, and automobiles headed for America with no idea whose hands they will fall into. At best, such children are in grave danger of being sold into slavery for sexual abuse. At worst, they aren't children at all. Following reports that soldiers were booted from their barracks at an Oklahoma Army base to make room for a wave of illegal immigrant minors, the Obama administration is refusing to give the federal lawmaker who represents the state in Congress access to the facility. Could it be that the administration is hiding something? The facility, Fort Still, is located in Lawton, about 85 miles southwest of Oklahoma City. It serves as the United States Army and Marine Corps Field Artillery School and houses nearly 9,000 soldiers, along with 62,621 family members, according to its official Army website. Last week, Judicial Watch received reports that single enlisted soldiers were transferred from their barracks to tents in order to accommodate the flood of unaccompanied alien children, UAC, coming from Central America. Lawmaker denied Fort Still entry after reports of displacing soldiers to accommodate illegal aliens, Judicial Watch. In all of this, Barack Obama is a powerful conduit. While Americans of all stripes seek desperately to pull their nation out of economic malaise, Obama is using every means, most of them quite unconstitutional, to legalize illegal aliens. Catholic organizations wield shocking power in this effort with little media scrutiny. Catholic Charities USA has taken on a major role in helping the federal government find temporary housing for the droves of Central Americans illegally crossing the border into the United States. And it's also helping finance the operation. NBC4 News in Los Angeles reported Thursday that St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Fontana, California was receiving daily busloads of illegal immigrants and housing them in a former convent that's not even zoned for overnight stays. The report opens with concerns about whether the church's helping hand for the illegals is even legal. John Andrews, communications director for the Catholic Diocese of San Bernardino, told WND that the diocese is working directly with the Department of Homeland Security to temporarily house the illegal immigrants. A DHS busload of 46 Central American women and children arrived Thursday. They are being housed in a former convent until they can be transported to various communities around the U.S., mostly by Greyhound bus. Andrews said the church was told by the government to expect a new busload of illegal immigrants every 72 hours. He said the initiative grew out of a meeting last week with a representative of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Leo Pullman, WorldNet Daily. Large left-leaning Protestant organizations have joined in as well. They are so determined to inundate America with unassimilated illegal immigrants that they have found a powerful wedge to augment their efforts: refugee status. Thousands of Central American children crossing the border illegally could soon turn into asylum seekers armed with immigration lawyers provided by church groups and paid for by federal tax dollars. Alexandria, Virginia-based Catholic Charities USA reported receiving $1.7 million in government grants in 2012, according to its IRS Form 990. But one of the largest recipients of government funds to resettle immigrant children is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. The USCCB helps resettle not only unaccompanied alien children, or UACs, who enter the country illegally, but also refugees fleeing persecution overseas who enter through legal channels. The USCCB is one of 9 agencies that receive hundreds of millions in tax dollars to resettle refugees and asylum seekers in the U.S. under contract with the federal government. 6 of the 9 contractors are religious groups, WND has learned, including the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, Episcopal Migration Ministries, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the Church World Service, and World Relief Corp., which includes a plethora of evangelical groups. The Catholic bishops alone received $65.9 million in federal grants to care for unaccompanied alien children and refugees, according to its 2012 annual report. Homan. The Episcopal Church is the best example of an institutionalized religion that is Christian in name only and does all it can to blaspheme everything held sacred by Christendom. Episcopal bishops are women and open homosexuals. Episcopal Bishop Gene Robinson has publicly married another man and just as publicly divorced. The presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, a woman with 2 last names, Catherine Jefferts Scory, has stated that the sinner's prayer of salvation to Jesus Christ is a great Western heresy. Bishop Jefferts Scory has also stated that Paul's exorcism of the demon-possessed soothsaying girl in the book of Acts was mean-spirited and bigoted, and that diversity is the only road to the kingdom of God. These are the custodians of the Washington National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. It's the 6th largest cathedral in the world, the 2nd largest in the United States, and the highest, as well as the 4th tallest structure in Washington, D.C. The cathedral is the seat of both the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Catherine Jefferts Scory, and the Bishop of the Diocese of Washington, Marian Edgar Bude. In November of 2014, this icon of Christianity in the heart of the nation's capital invited a delegation of Muslim worshippers who laid out prayer rugs that literally set their backs against the altar. A woman protested by loudly proclaiming that only Jesus Christ is Savior. She was manhandled off the premises.
Jesus Christ died on that cross over there. He is the reason why we are to worship only Him. Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior. We have built the largest mosques in this country. Why can't you worship in your mosque?
Illegal immigrants has been a Catholic agenda with hard-left Catholic Democrat politicians like the late Edward M. Teddy Kennedy and former Senator, now Vice President Joe Biden, pushing legislation to make it happen. They have successfully turned generous welfare states like Minnesota into little Somalia, and Minnesotans pick up the tab as their neighborhoods devolve around them into a Muslim third world. Over the course of 2 decades, the federal government's refugee resettlement program has forcibly infused the Minneapolis-St. Paul area of Minnesota with a large dose of Somali culture, and the transition has not always been smooth. 2 Somali men from Minneapolis-St. Paul have died recently fighting for ISIS, and several Somali women have reportedly left their homes in the area to join ISIS. The FBI says up to 25 Somalis have left to fight with Islamic militants in the Middle East since 2007. The resettlement program gets its authority from the Refugee Act of 1980, sponsored by the late Senator Ted Kennedy and former Senator Joe Biden, and is overseen by the U.S. Department of State. The act allows refugees to become U.S. citizens within 5 years. Once here, the refugees are allowed to bring in extended family members through the State Department's Family Reunification Program. Deborah Anderson, a working mother employed in the healthcare industry in Minneapolis, said she became concerned 2 years ago after she bought her house in the northeast quadrant of the city and found out a second mosque was proposed nearby. I basically live and work in the heart of the beast, and shortly after I moved in, there was a proposal for another mosque in my neighborhood, said Anderson, who was a member of American Congress for Truth. There are parts of southern Minneapolis that look like Somalia. We have one district in South Minneapolis that was estimated to be 40% East African, and they have a pretty strong political hold here. Homan. There are surprising advantages to being labeled a refugee in America, and organizations like the Immigration Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama are more than eager to help with leaflets. The benefits include food stamps, supplemental security income, temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, state children's health insurance program, SCHIP. As America bears the load and the landscape of her culture is forever changed for the worse, her enemies are making money from taxpayers in the process, a great deal of it. In the midst of a brutal ongoing recession, the federal government nevertheless welcomed 74,654 refugees in 2009. The White House announced in October of 2010 that refugee admissions for fiscal year 2011 would be 80,000, the same as for the current year. There are now 5 to 6 unemployed people competing for each available job, but elite humanitarians don't care how difficult it is for today's refugees to get a foothold through employment. Local papers continue to publish sad stories of refugees who are running out of benefits as they hopelessly try to find employment in a tough jobs depression. Some of them are so desperate that they consider returning to their home country, which apparently cannot be so bad as originally characterized. The ugly truth is there is a lot of money to be had through the refugee industrial complex. Catholic Charities has a big collection plate permanently stationed in Washington for its supposed good works, which might raise eyebrows about the separation of church and state. The Conference of Catholic Bishops' 2009 Migration and Refugee Services report shows $58,025,605 in government grants and contracts going to that organization. Other religious groups stand foursquare at the taxpayer trough also, like the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, which got $29,907,000 in 2009. Brenda Walker, Social Contract Press. An antagonistic government calls these enclaves seed programs, and when local citizens become active in resisting, they are labeled as pockets of resistance. Do these sound like warfare terms to you? They are meant to be. It may seem unfair to claim Rome as the root of this conspiracy, but is rightly deserved and little discussed. The Catholic Church, through the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Migration, both paved the road for Barack Hussein Obama's ultimate takeover of free West society and continues to actively enable the fundamental transformation of America by sinking the U.S. in a tsunami of illegal aliens. In coming to Obama's aid in erasing forever America's borders, the bishops sold the USA out, including its Catholics, for the proverbial 30 pieces of silver. In biblical terms, Obama and the Catholic bishops, who both birthed his progress to the seat of power and back him on his fundamental transformation mission, are in league with the devil. The certain-to-come protestations of the bishops should fall on the same deaf ears they use to shun all pleas of mercy from Americans overwhelmed by invaders in their hometowns and cities. Judy McLeod, Canada Free Press. Secret subversives. In 1928, the two men on the ballot for president were the Democrat governor of New York, Alfred E. Smith, and the Republican Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover. The issue of Smith's Catholic religion came up in an exchange between himself and lawyer Charles Marshall via editorials printed in Atlantic Monthly magazine. Marshall warned that when torn between the best interests of America and the best interests of the Church, devout Catholics were always at risk of choosing Rome over the land of the free. The deduction is inevitable that as all power over human affairs not given to the state by God is given by God to the Roman Catholic Church. No other churches or religions or ethical societies have, in theory, any direct power from God, and are without direct divine sanction, and therefore without natural right to function on the same basis as the Roman Catholic Church in the religious and moral affairs of the state. The result is that the Church, if true to her basic political doctrine, is hopelessly committed to that intolerance that has disfigured so much of her history. This is frankly admitted by Roman Catholic authorities. Furthermore, the doctrine of the two powers, in effect and theory, inevitably makes the Roman Catholic Church, at times, sovereign and paramount over the state. We quote Pope Leo in his encyclical letter on the Christian constitution of states. Over the mighty multitude of mankind, God has set rulers with power to govern, and he has willed that one of them, the Pope, should be the head of all. We quote Pope Leo in his encyclical letter on the reunion of Christendom. We who hold upon this earth the place of God Almighty. Charles C. Marshall, Atlantic Monthly. Smith lost the election but was soon immortalized in an annual dinner hosted by the Church that requires the two American finalists for the presidency to appear before the most powerful papal emissaries in the world, the Cardinal of the Archdiocese of New York, and make him laugh. Today, the dinners are presided over by the aristocratic descendant of the New York governor, Alfred E. Smith IV. The dinners continue even in off-election years where luminaries from all walks show homage to Rome, from the director of the FBI to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretary of State. During the 2008 dinner, soon-to-be President Barack Obama may have taken a swipe at his benefactors in what appeared to be, on the surface, a self-deprecating joke.
I'm thrilled to get this invitation, and I feel right at home here because it's often been said that I share the politics of Alfred E. Smith and the ears of Alfred E. Newman.
Just who Alfred E. Newman was patterned after for Mad Magazine by artist Harvey Kurtzman remains a mystery, but Governor Alfred E. Smith was certainly known to Kurtzman as they were contemporaries. If a president isn't careful, that's the kind of joke that will put a knife-wielding man in the East or an armed felon in your element.